All kinds of bizarre things are happening right now in Canada with the politics and with the law, so we're going to be talking about that. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. We have a lot to cover in this episode. Donald Trump's government has put sanctions on a Canadian that works for the ICC, the International Criminal Court. These are based in The Hague. We'll get into that. Elizabeth May says that she is going to resign. She's not going to run as leader of the Green Party anymore. One wonders what that will mean for the Green Party. Things coming unraveled for Doug Ford, and it looks like the separatists are making a comeback in Quebec. Green Party leader Elizabeth May has chosen to tell the world that she will not lead the Green Party into the next election, which hopefully will come very soon. The way that the government is falling to pieces in Canada, the federal government especially, let's hope that we don't even get through one session without a no confidence vote. I wonder where Miss May would put her vote currently with the if a no confidence vote was to come into the House of Commons. It's an interesting question, but she has decided for the second time that she's going to step down as leader of the Green Party, and she's going to try to build a caucus before she steps down. I don't believe that. I think that Miss May is kind of like the guy on the People's Party of Canada. Like, if the leader don't get elected, they're not doing anything. You know what I mean? Like the whole party, it really exists on paper. I mean, there was two of them in the last session. This time around, there's only one. So I don't know that the Green Party is as significant or as important to the role of the House of Commons as people once thought they might be. I mean, in reality, how much more green of a zealot do you have to be than Stephen Guilbeault and Julie DeBruzen, truthfully, and Mark Carney, who's got an entire book on against the problems of carbon, this made-up philosophy that will allow him to take all of your money away from you and constrict you into tiny little cubicles 65 floors up in the air. Before we start to talk about Doug Ford and all of the things that he's losing his grip on, we're going to talk about Donald Trump, the United States government imposing sanctions on people from the International Criminal Court, ICC, one of whom is born in Canada and is a judge there, imposing further sanctions in response to the ICC's ongoing threat to Americans and Israelis. Now, it talks about how they're going to put the sanctions on these four people. Kimberly Prost is the Canadian judge, Trial Division, International Criminal Court, and you can see there's a couple of other names there. I'll leave a link to the description, but if you come down under the names, you'll see that Prost is being designated for ruling to authorize the ICC's investigation into U.S. personnel in Afghanistan. So this is a far-left judge who's trying to tell you that you're at war for 20 years, but you got to all of a sudden behave like a Boy Scout, some person who thinks that they understand what war looks like, sitting over there on the far left demanding that all, men are toxic in all likelihood, and all of the rest of that who thinks that somehow the Americans on the ground should be tried for war crimes, while the men that are fighting in Afghanistan don't touch them at all. And the Americans have leveled sanctions against this judge for just that. As a result of today's sanctions-related actions, all property and interest in property of the sanctioned person described above that are in the United States or in possession or control of U.S. persons are blocked and must be reported to the Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Asset Control. Additionally, all individuals or entities that are owned, either directly or indirectly, individually or in the aggregate, 50% or more by one or more blocked persons are also blocked. All transactions by U.S. persons with or within the United States that involve any property or interest in property or is designated or otherwise blocked persons are prohibited unless authorized by general specific license issued by the OFAC or exempt. These prohibitions include making any contribution or provision of funds, goods, or services by, to, or for the benefit of any blocked person, and the receipt of any contribution or provisions of funds, goods, and services from any such person. All of that is to say that the person who's named or any of them, but Provost and the one that I'm talking about is not allowed to own anything in America. They're not allowed to make any money in America. They're not allowed to hire anybody to make money for them. They're not allowed to hire anybody to look after their property. So if she owns anything, stocks, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's making money in the United States of America, she's not permitted to do that anymore. And if I were her, I absolutely would treat America like a no-fly zone, because the second that she tries to get through customs, they're going to take her into custody. The Montreal Gazette is reporting that the PQ, the Parti des Québécois, would win an election if one were held today. They claim that they held a poll through Léger, and that this poll indicates that the Parti des Québécois would get 35% of the popular vote, and the Liberals would get 26%, and the CAQ would only get 17%. For those of you that are not aware, the PQ, the Parti Québécois, are the separatists, the hardcore separatists. Now, there's a lot of provincial parties in the province of Quebec who would, have varying degrees of separation in their mandates. They like to say the word sovereignty all the time, meaning Quebec being sovereign. However, when the PQ wins an election, and typically the province then supports a lot of Bloc. So when we have the PQ taking the reins in the province of Quebec, you will get a lot of seats given to the Bloc. And if for whatever reason we were to have a early election because of the mess that is Mark Carney, so between this and, Pierre Poilievre coming back to the House, and Mark Carney can't even get Donald Trump on the phone, let alone in the same room. Mark Carney's being mocked on the world stage by all of the Europeans, by the United States. It's going to make for an interesting fall session, I would think, between this and the other, because if for whatever reason the Bloc can trigger an election knowing that people are supporting the Parti des Québécois, then they will go for that, right? And if we could just get what we need, to tell you the truth, what conservatives and Canadians need is a decent leader in the NDP. Because if the NDP gets an idea that they can get some of their seats back, well, they'll happily vote no confidence. And that's really the missing element right now. We need somebody that the people who vote NDP like to come forward and be, charismatic and make them believe that they would win an election with him or her at the helm. And then all of a sudden the members that are in the House of Commons will vote for no confidence, because they will feel that they will be able to claw back some of those seats that they lost to the various parties. Now we'll move on to Doug Ford, and how with every passing minute he's becoming more and more erratic and more desperate, and he's hoping that popularity contests will win him, seats or what have you. He's hoping that he can survive the fall session. The economy in Ontario is taking a real beating because Doug Ford has no idea, no imagination on how to change it, because the Americans have changed the trading environment, because it is no longer status quo. Doug Ford has no idea what he's doing. He just knows that he has a lot of restrictions in the way. He can't change that. He's got a lot of heavy-duty taxes on people, but he relies on those. I mean, he's cutting checks left, right, and center. So he's really in over his head, and it's starting to, the top's starting to come in over top of him, I believe. We can take one example I have is Ontario Premier says that he'd blast the CEO of American-owned Stelco after U.S. announces more tariffs. Now, Stelco is the steel mill that's in Hamilton, and apparently it's owned by a fella in America who bought the company for $3.4 billion. And what I love is how the guy's obviously a billionaire, and Doug Ford figures he'd just walk up to him and start barking at him. Nonetheless, what he does with his company is his business. What I can't understand is why Doug Ford keeps trying to blame Americans for the fact that he can't figure out a way to get steel manufactured in Canada that can be used in Canada, say in Canadian boats or in Canadian products or in Canadian anything. Why has he not figured out a way to create a market inside of Canada? Even if it's only a trickle, it will begin somewhere. Of course, we can see that he has no idea what he's doing, and he's just lashing out. And with every single press conference, he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting upset up here. I get a little passionate about it." And it's like, bud, you need to get passionate about solving the problems. If you want to get angry at somebody for regulatory problems, you need to get angry at Mark Carney, your new best bud, the guy you're like, "Oh, he's doing a great job." He is not doing a good job. He's not doing a good job in the smallest way. But you don't want to say that out loud because he's your new best buddy and you feel like if you rub shoulders with him for long enough, maybe you'll fall upstairs. I'm not sure if that's going to be the situation. I think that in the moment's notice, Mark Carney would use you as a scapegoat, just like he did with Justin Trudeau, just like he did with Chrystia Freeland, and so on and so forth. That's the kind of fish you're swimming with, bud. If we needed more proof that the economy was really bad, I mean, I've told you the economy is bad. I've told you the reason that the inflation number is where it is. Doug Ford must be being advised that these problems are coming. Maybe he's getting it from Mark Carney himself. Who knows? He is getting quite desperate to have people spending money. Now, remember, they're already laying people off in the steel sector. They're already laying people off in manufacturing, or those jobs have just moved completely. And they're already laying people off in the auto sector. So there's not a lot of spending going on in Ontario. And we've just come through the summer and we can see that there's no spending happening down there, especially by the group that likes to spend the most in the summertime, males from 18 to 55. So the Doug Ford is saying to his public service employees, you have to go back to work 5 days a week. Now, they've been working 3 days a week since 2022. So imagine that they already have a lot of routine laid out. I mean, I say to you 3 days a week, but it could be that they're going to work, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they're not coming back to work again till like back into the get up, get your hair done, get up an hour and a half before you got to sign in, and all the rest of that are 3 hours or whatever, you know what I mean? Where now they're on this routine where on, a couple days a week, they can sleep until like 20 minutes before they got to log in on their computer, and they can do it in slippers and, with their hair up and all the things that you might consider when you're just working from home. The schedule that they would have, is going to be rather entrenched. It's been years. This isn't a couple of weeks. This isn't a couple of months. It's been years. So you begin to think that it becomes the norm. But Doug Ford is so desperate to try to get people to spend money that he is willing to take all of the money that he gives you and put you in a position where you have to spend it. Make you buy more gas, make you buy more sandwiches or coffee or whatever it is that you're going to be spending your money on when you're out and about on those extra 2 days. That's what he needs from you. And it might seem like it's only $10, $20 a day. But if he's got enough of people doing it, it might give him that small buoyancy to get him through to January, because that's really what they're going to be worried about right now. Right now, in their minds, they're worried about what people might be spending for Christmas. And that is something that, I'll talk about it in a different video. But when I hear the Premier of Ontario order this public servant union back to work for 2 days a week, I understand that that's a desperate ploy to get people to spend more money in an effort to try and jog, as they say, the economy. And if the economy wasn't bad enough, the press decided that they would throw yet another problem on Doug Ford's lap, this self-defense issue. Now, I'm going to be talking about it. I ran a poll last week. As many of you regular viewers of the Canadian Shield know, I run polls. And I run one every day, and I did one, I think, last week. Let's call it a time of recording, where I asked if people believe that the right to defend yourself should be put in the Constitution. And many of you come after me and were like, "Oh, like obviously it's already in the charter," and it's not. And this recent event is a perfect segue for me to explain to you exactly what happens here. Okay, so Doug Ford says something is broken after Ontario man charged with defending his home from an intruder, that the police are saying that the intruder has life-threatening injuries. That term is relevant to the conversation. Everybody is trying to convince themselves that all he did was defend his house, and now he's being charged, and that's ridiculous. And it's ridiculous that he's being charged, absolutely, but we have to understand what he's being charged for. He's being charged for over defending himself. I'm not exaggerating at all. They want you to either run away, they want you to, basically push the person and run as far as you can. Now, let me read you the statute before I explain to you why this is a problem and why Canada really needs to have some amendments made to its constitution, so that when you are born or a member of this country, you have rights that cannot be taken away with legislation. Before I break down what I believe should happen and how Canadians need to make sure that our constitution is amended to give us the right to defend ourselves under any circumstances, no matter what, Let's have a look at the code that he's being charged under, the homeowner. Section 34 of the Criminal Code, a person is not guilty of an offense if they believe on reasonable grounds that force is being used against them or another person, or that a threat of force is being made against them or another person. The act that constitutes the offense is committed for the purpose of defending or protecting themselves or that the other person from that use of threat, force, and the act committed is reasonable in its circumstance. In determining whether the act committed is reasonable in its circumstance, the court shall consider the relevant circumstances of the person, the other parties in the act, including but not limited to the following factors: the nature of the threat, the extent to which the force was imminent, and whether there were other means available to respond to the potential use of force. That's important, that one. The person's role in the incident, whether any party to the incident used or threatened or to use a weapon, any party. Not just the one or the other, any party. The size, age, gender, and physical capabilities of the parties in the incident. So if some little fellow is trying to break into your house and you're much bigger than him, apparently you don't have the right to defend yourself. The nature, duration, and history of any relationship between the parties in the incident, including any prior use of threat or force, and the nature of that force or threat. Any history of interaction or communication between the parties to the incident, the nature of the proportionality of the person's response to the use of threat of force, and whether the act committed in the response to the use of the threat of force that the person knew was lawful. And the next one says you have no defense against the police, so you got to let them arrest you if they want to arrest you. It's important to remember that under the British Empire, under British common law, they don't want anybody taking what they'll term as the law into their own hands. So you're supposed to be aware that you're not allowed to defend yourself. And not only are you not allowed to defend yourself, if you do defend yourself, it has to be with the bare minimum. You have to be aware of that in the moment. You got to ignore all of the adrenaline that's going through your body. If you're taller or older or younger, you're not going to be given any leeway in this situation. If for whatever reason you grab an implement or use something against the other individual, that's a strike against you. If you could have, say, slipped out the door or jumped out of your window or went on the balcony and locked yourself in the bathroom, then that's exactly what the police expect you to do. And that's what I would imagine the police showed up and just decided that the individual could have escaped, and rather than defend himself, they would have expected him to run away. And the individual who was the intruder was, like they said, life-threatening. Now we can speculate on what that may or may not be 100 times. Nonetheless, somewhere in there, the police officer decided that the homeowner, the victim, took the law into his own hands, violated at least one of these articles of Section 34 of the Criminal Code of Canada, which nullifies your right to defend yourself at any cost, which nullifies stand your ground, which nullifies castle doctrine. You understand? So everything in there is designed to say that you have to do the bare minimum to get away from the person. That's what that law says. That's what that statute says. And at no time can you use an implement. At no time can you go over the line. So I guess what they were hoping you'd do is just kick him in the shin, like you see on TV, and he would start to jump up and down while he holds onto his shin, and you could run out the door, and I guess he could just pick through your belongings at his leisure. I mean, we're talking about the police forces in Ontario, so they're expecting you to just give your keys up at the front door for the car, right? That's the problem that we need to bring to light. The fact that there is no right to defend yourself in this country is something that Canadians need to be looking at. We need to make amendments to our criminal code. We need to make amendments to our constitution, We have to start adding things to our constitution so that we have civil liberties, so that the government is not sitting on our shoulder all the time, expecting us to behave in a manner that it's impossible to think what that man was going through. That individual was full of adrenaline, woke up out of a cold sleep, right? Sound asleep. And you wake right up and you're expected to understand this body of law, and you're in your mind thinking you're scared out of your, who knows? But let's just assume that you're frightened, your adrenaline is up, and you're going to do whatever you have to do to defend yourself. Well, apparently you're not allowed to do whatever you have to do to defend yourself. You're only permitted to do the bare minimum under Section 34 of the Criminal Code of Canada. Now, when I ran that poll the other week, I knew that. And I wanted to know what people were thinking, because I believe that we need to start to draft amendments to our Constitution. Just because the Constitution was written, however many years ago and was brought home in the 80s, doesn't mean that it can't be altered to suit our current situations. Freedom of speech. Everybody tries to come at me when I talk about freedom of speech. They're like, oh no, it's covered under in the charter. What I want anyone to do who wants to say that to me, go read Article 1 of the charter. Because when they went after the truckers, they invoked Article 1 of the charter. And Article 1 of the charter says that at any time, if I invoke Article 1 of the charter, all the rest of the charter is null and void. So I think that it's time that we start to have these protections placed into the Constitution so that they're there as part of our right as being citizens of this nation for as long as this nation holds together. You can let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.